I don't know if they'll ever find this camera. Maybe in a year, maybe in 100. Maybe it's already buried deep under the snow, like our footprints. But if they do find it, I want them to understand one thing. We didn't climb for glory. We climbed because we couldn't stay below. A mountain isn't a place. It's a question that stands before you and waits for an answer. And when you come close enough, you realize the answer isn't in words. It's in every step, every breath, every second you refuse to stop. My name is Andrew Irvine. I'm 22 years old, an engineer who always believed in precision. But here among the rock, the ice, and the wind, even precision begins to breathe differently. Up here, you learn something simple. The most important thing in life is when your machine breathes together with you. Before we begin the story, subscribe to PovStory, the channel where you'll dive into incredible expeditions, journeys, and discoveries, and experience them all through the eyes of those who were there. I didn't wake from the cold. I woke from a sound, a steady, familiar hiss. Oxygen. My faithful companion at 5,200 meters. The air up here has no scent. It simply exists, thin and dry, as if each breath were a sip from an empty glass. We're camped at the base of the Rongbuk Glacier. Around us, there's only rock, snow, and frozen dust, drifting endlessly in the wind, as if Everest itself is erasing everything unnecessary, leaving only what deserves to stay. When the sun reaches the slopes, the peaks glow like molten glass. It's so beautiful that it almost hurts to look at it. Mallory always wakes before the others. He steps out of the tent quietly, as if afraid to disturb the mountain's sleep. He stands there, hands in his pockets, staring upward. His face is calm, but I know there's a storm inside him. He looks at the summit not as a goal, but as a debt waiting to be paid. Sometimes I think he doesn't want to conquer Everest. He wants to speak to it, to make some kind of pact. I'm not sure men like him can be understood. I'm 22 and still capable of wonder. I marvel at how the sun can burn your skin at -20. How the snow creaks under your boots so loudly it feels alive. My work is simple: oxygen systems. I check valves, pressure, seals. I listen. I adjust. I love that sound. The calm, even hiss that feels like the breathing of a sleeping giant. Sometimes I think that sound is life itself. As long as the metal breathes, I do too. Mallory often says, "Your machine is our chance." I usually just nod. At this altitude, even words feel like a waste of air. Up here, oxygen is currency, and every sound has to be earned. Around the 11th of May, we climbed above 6,000 meters, to the place where no animals walk and no birds fly. The world changes there. Silence becomes a kind of atmosphere. The wind doesn't just blow, it shapes the space. When it moves through the tents, it feels as though the mountain itself is breathing. Mallory calls me Sandy. There's something warm in the way he says it. We're different. He's experience and calm. I'm curiosity and numbers. But when we stand side by side on the slope, we're the same, equally small against this endless white. Sometimes I look at Everest and think, it isn't an enemy. It simply stands there, indifferent, ancient, beyond everything we know. We're just dust in its breath. But even dust can shine for a moment in the sun. In the evening, I sit by the tent's entrance, recording pressure readings, not for reports, just to feel a sense of control. The machine breathes. I breathe. Mallory says that tomorrow we'll climb to 7,000, if the weather holds. I nod, and we fall silent. Later, as the wind howls outside, it sounds like it's trying to guess which of us will survive. I lie there listening to the wind finally eased by morning. Inside the tents, the air was damp. Thin frost glittered on the walls, and every breath left a faint cloud that disappeared instantly. Mallory sat near the entrance, holding a cup of tea, staring at the pale light filtering through the canvas. His hands trembled, not from cold, but from fatigue. And yet, when he looked up, I could still see that same calm determination, the quiet confidence that somehow kept us all moving. Sometimes he feels like a man from another century, not just older, but belonging to a time when courage was considered a science. There's something Victorian in him, a belief that faith and logic can exist in the same breath. He doesn't talk much, but when he does, his words sound as if they're meant for history. We started climbing again, moving toward the intermediate camp, around 6,400 meters. The ice beneath our boots crunched like broken glass. The wind carved our faces raw. Mallory led the way. I followed, the oxygen tank hissing steadily at my side, like a heart refusing to stop. Every few minutes he would pause, glance down the slope and say, "Look, Sandy, down there is the world we left. Up here, we're between heaven and nothing." The snow swirled in the air until everything turned into a moving fog. Time itself seemed to stretch and thin. It no longer felt like we were moving forward, but upward into a place where the usual rules of existence no longer applied. And maybe that's what all expeditions truly seek. Not to prove that man can endure, but to discover where exactly he ends. That evening we sat near the fire. Mallory pulled out a small notebook, writing a few lines and carefully drying the pages above the flames. I asked what he was writing. He smiled and said, "Things I'll forget if I live." Then, after a pause, he added softly, "And if I don't, someone else might read them." We both laughed, but there was something fragile in that laughter. I watched his face in the flickering light. The sharp cheekbones, the dark eyes, the faint movement of his lips, as if he were praying without sound. Mallory wasn't just a climber. He was a man searching for something sacred in the silence. A scientist of faith, trying to find God not in a church, but on a slope where even thoughts freeze. When I finally lay down to sleep, the wind rose again, tearing at the ropes and whipping the canvas. I closed my eyes and listened. The mountain was breathing louder that night, and I couldn't tell whether it was a warning or simply the sound of a living thing that never sleeps. The next morning felt unnaturally clear. The sky was cloudless, the air sharp and thin, like glass that could cut you. We began the climb before sunrise. The temperature had dropped to -30, and even through thick gloves, my fingers burned with cold. The body learns not to fight pain here. It simply accepts it. Each step makes you lighter, but also emptier, as if life slowly trades itself for altitude. Mallory moved ahead, slow but steady, as though following a path only he could see. I trailed behind, listening to the hiss of my oxygen set beside my ear. That sound had become my music. If it ever stopped, I knew I would too. The ridge narrowed, the snow crunched, and every step had to be placed with the precision of a chess mover. One mistake, and the game would end instantly. Above 7,000 meters, the air began to vanish, My head felt heavy, thoughts scattered like loose pages in the wind. The mind turned mechanical, jerky, uneven. The world narrowed to 3 colors: white, blue, and black. Mallory shouted something back to me, but I only caught fragments. Higher. Just a little higher. And then there was only the wind. Halfway up, I noticed the valve was hissing unevenly. I stopped, checked the pressure. It was dropping. The seal must have frozen. My hands shook as I unscrewed the coupling, the metal burning my fingertips through the gloves. For a moment, I thought it was over. Then the hiss evened out again. I stood there, listening. The steady rhythm returned, and for that brief second, I felt an almost holy relief. It was the sound of being alive. Mallory turned, saw me, and nodded once. That was enough. He knew it was fixed. I knew we were still breathing. By noon, the sun hung high, yet gave no warmth. The shadows were sharp as blades. Mallory took a sip of water and said, "This mountain doesn't like the weak." I answered, "It doesn't like the strong either." He smiled. Neither of us spoke again. There's something invisible between us now, not just the rope. It's the rhythm of breath, shared and fragile. Up here, we are closer than anyone can be on the plains below. As we move again, the wind changes. It doesn't strike anymore. It whispers. And sometimes, I think the mountain really is listening. Maybe it can hear how we breathe. And maybe it's simply waiting to find out which one of us will fall silent first. By evening, the air felt drier, almost lighter. A lie the mountain tells to keep hope alive. We had been living above 7,000 meters long enough to feel the chemistry of our own bodies taking over from reason. And sometime toward the end of May, we crossed that thin line where movement becomes deliberate. Not because you choose it, but because your cells insist on it. From up here, the world shows itself more honestly. Down below, the cities hum. But here, every second either serves you or erases you. I sat on a flat rock beside our tent, turning a regulator nut between my fingers and watching shadows crawl over the slope, as if someone were tilting a giant clock. Mallory paced the perimeter of our little camp, stopping to test the snow with a gloved hand, to touch a rope, to feel the grain of the crust. He could read snow the way I read a pressure gauge. "Look, Sandy," he said, pressing his palm to a thin, icy skin. "This holds now, but once the sun hits it, it'll give." There was no panic in his voice, only the cadence of knowledge. I thought we were more alike than we seemed. He trusted his eyes and feet. I trusted pressure and valves, and both of us were trying to speak altitude in the language of facts. When we reached roughly 7,700 meters and marked out a spot for Camp 6, the sky above us looked rinsed clean. I stowed the cylinders so they wouldn't ice over during the night and rechecked the seals. Metal gets temperamental at this height. One careless touch with bare skin and a microfracture in a gasket can be the beginning of an ending. In my head, our small rope team became a deep diving bell. Others descend into dense water. We descend into thin air, with pressure carried not outside our hull, but inside our tanks. Noel Odell arrived from below later than we'd expected, moving with the steady patience of a man who measures the world in layered stone. He had that sort of gaze that doesn't hunt for drama, only for detail. I always respected him for that. He never argued with mountain physics. He just collected evidence in time. He nodded toward my set. "How's she breathing?" "Even," I said. And here that word is half a prayer. That night I lay awake for a long time, listening to the wind cut the canvas. We spoke little. Water was rationed because melting snow is time and fuel, and up high, every volt, every flame, every swallow has a cost. Sleep came in flakes between 2 and 4, and each time I surfaced into the dark, I heard the same thing. A clean, even hiss. I trimmed the flow a little lower, right on that narrow line where the head stays clear and the rate doesn't murder tomorrow's chance. Morning, it must have been June 7th, tore the cloud like paper, and for a moment the ridge drew itself in simple geometry. "Look, Sandy," Mallory called. "For now it's ours." He could stop me with a glance and make me look where he looked. For once, the fear that lived between my shoulder blades shifted sideways and became only weight. Not a curse, not an omen, a weight you can carry. By dusk, we'd prepared for an early start. I oiled the threads, sleeved the hoses with extra cloth against freezing, and worked the shut-off valves until they moved cleanly. No stick, no drag. Mallory laid out the gear so that our fingers would find each piece in the dark without thought. He took a small notebook from his pocket, stared at a blank page for a long time, and wrote nothing. "We'll do it simple and clean," he said, folding it shut. That was his phrase, simple and clean. I liked the idea of a clean ascent. No big words, no witnesses, just 2 men and a line that had to be crossed. Late that night, when the wind finally died, the quiet became loud. I touched the regulator again, the way some people touch a charm, and whispered to it, "Work." And we will too. In the dark, my hands found what they had rehearsed. Gloves, mask, helmet, ice axe. Everything lay where it should. Discipline is a kind of warmth. When everything is ready, fear has fewer places to live. All that remained was sleep, an hour if we were lucky. But the metronome of tomorrow was already ticking in my head. Steps, pauses, the first little rock steps, a short there and onward. If the weather would hold until midday, we could be on the main ridge before the eyelid of cloud closed again. We both knew it, and we said nothing. On this ridge, even hope must be spent carefully. We moved out in the dark, when the world still had no name. The snow under our crampons made a courteous hush, as if it feared alerting the mountain to our presence. Masks sealed, hoses curving in soft arcs, and right away, I found that proper flow where thought keeps pace with step. Around 8, the dimness thinned. The day opened first in ash, and then in a cold, pale glow that made every rock edge sharper than memory. A ridge hates haste. Above 8,200 meters, the body stops arguing and starts negotiating. We climbed in short, measured units. 10 or 12 steps, a pause, 6 more, one breath a shade deeper than the mask allows. Onward. Mallory led a little left, skirting those treacherous lacquered plates of ice. I kept an easy tension on the rope and glanced at the gauge now and then. The needle behaved like a trained animal, obedient, unexciting. The first meaningful step in the rock met us with clean verticality. Nothing theatrical, just stone requiring neat hands. Mallory entered it like a paragraph he'd read before. 2 points of purchase, a tight transfer of weight, crampon bites, and he was already above my shoulder making me a place. I followed, thinking how strange it is that at this height, the simplest movements become a luxury. Each tooth of steel rang on the rock like a hammer in an empty nave. Toward 11, the wind returned, not as an enemy, but as a stern judge. A cloud slid up from the Tibetan side, thinning our world the way fire thins paper. Clouds never travel alone here. If you see one, its procession is already on the march. I nudged the flow a quarter mark higher to keep my head from dropping behind my feet. Mallory looked back once and nodded. Our conversations had been reduced to signals a while ago. We reached a place where the ridge raised its chin. In my memory, this is the border between we are going and we are going despite. When the mask briefly welded itself to my cheek, I snapped the strap. A quick pain, clean breath, rhythm again. For a heartbeat, I was afraid. Not for me, but for the mechanics. If the system failed, there would be nothing left of us but a rope knocking idly against stone. But the needle held its line, and I felt that tidy happiness that arrives with even hissing. Around noon, the silence thickened. The world shrank to the length of our rope. I no longer saw Mallory as a man, but as a pattern of motion, pick, crampon, hand, breath. He moved as if he were following an invisible map, with only a single viable path. This one. I followed and felt, oddly, that I trusted that map more than any diagram we had studied in the valley. Somewhere ahead, you could sense it in the relief. Another wall waited. You couldn't see the whole of it, just the hint. A darker band in the cloud white, a tooth that showed and vanished. I felt my heart try to kick faster, and the mask forbade it. I forced myself back into count. 6 steps in, 6 steps out. Discipline beats heroics up here. Then a calm passed through me like a hand smoothing cloth. It was as if everything had already happened, and we were only walking toward a sentence that had long been written. I lifted my eyes and, in that white pause, saw the edge of a cloud slip to our right, while, to the left, the sky opened. A narrow window of blue that lasted a few seconds, no more. It felt, absurdly, as if someone below had looked up at just that moment. "We go," Mallory said, perfectly calm, and it was enough for me to take another step. We edged over a small cornice, stopped just long enough to check the knot and the cylinder harness, then moved on into a white that finally had a scent, not of cold, but of quiet. If luck ran with us, we would reach the foot of the final pyramid before every window closed. If not, at least we'd know we had arrived at that line where a man can still speak to a mountain in a human language. I listened to the hissing. It was even, which meant we still had time. I opened my eyes, and for a moment I didn't know where I was. The world was gone. Only a white plain stretched around me, no shadows, no edges, as if we'd been placed inside a vast porcelain bowl. The mask pressed tight against my face until I felt not the material, but my own breath pushing back. When I sat up, the tent gave a low, hollow sigh, the fabric exhaling. That sound meant the wind had shifted again. And when the wind changes, everything changes with it. Mallory was sitting by the entrance, holding the flap with gloved hands, staring out into what I would have called emptiness. To him, it was something to be read. "The ridge is out there," he said, pointing into the featureless white. "Visibility will come in bursts. We'll move by rhythm, not by sight." I nodded. Up here above 8,000 meters, rhythm weighs more than vision. When we stepped outside, the world didn't brighten. It simply allowed us to move. The snow was grainy as sand, slipping beneath the crampons as if it despised the bite of steel. I checked the hoses. A soft, curved arc. No kinks. I set the flow to that thin line between clarity and economy. My head answered with a faint bell-like tone, the sound of a small chime struck somewhere inside my skull. That's how it feels when there's just enough oxygen not to think about oxygen. The blindness of altitude doesn't start with the eyes. It begins with memory. You forget simple things. Where you are standing, what you ate yesterday, why your hands ache even inside gloves. Then you forget that you've forgotten, and you keep walking, as if that was the plan all along. I caught myself on trivial rituals, counting to 10, losing the count, starting again, uncertain if I'd already finished. It isn't dangerous because it stops you. It's dangerous because it quietly bends your path. Around midday, the cloud lifted suddenly, like someone had folded back the corner of a sheet. We saw a piece of the slope, black ribs of stone emerging from snow like bone. Where the snow thinned, I chose rock. Crampons grip better than you'd think if you give them patience. Mallory moved slightly left, following a line I couldn't see but could feel through the rope, a faint, steady pulse. If the rope is a nerve, it was calm now. At about 8,300 meters, I caught my first real shadow of hallucination. Something dark ahead. A pack? A body? I blinked, wiped the goggles, pulled the mask up for a sip of real air. Here it's like a joke that's lost its punchline. When I looked again, there was nothing. Just a patch my mind had painted on the snow. I fell back into rhythm and decided not to trust my eyes unless confirmed by my feet. Mallory turned occasionally, his face moving like an equation, balancing slope and breadth. "All right?" his eyes asked. I raised the axe a little in reply. The mountain had taught us. Speech must be short as a step and clear even against the wind. Near 8,400 meters, the clouds closed again, and the world flattened. That's the most dangerous kind of white, when relief vanishes. You can step into nothing without knowing. I followed Mallory by instinct, not by sight. My eyes were his boots and his hand placing the axe. I set each foot in the shadow of his last, thinking only one thing: don't break the line. We paused to rest. I slipped off one glove just long enough to touch the regulator. The metal felt warmer than I expected. Pressure held steady. "Sandy," Mallory said. "If visibility clears again, we'll swing right. The shelves are firmer there." I nodded, remembering only the word right. Everything else was excess. At the end of that brief rest, I heard a strange sound, silk rubbed against stone. That's how a cornice breathes before it breaks. "Careful," I whispered to myself, though I already was. Cornices favor the quiet. They fall for those who shout. When we moved again, the whiteness retreated just enough. A thin slit of blue sky appeared between the clouds. For a second, it felt as if somewhere far below, someone else was watching us. An odd thought. But those thoughts save you. If someone sees you, you still exist. The blindness of height never ends suddenly. It drains away like water from sand. By the end of the day, I could see shadows again. The outline of crampons, the depth of stone, the crisp crack of ice under the pick. We were nearing the section Mallory called the real test. I didn't ask what he meant. Up here, answers always wait inside the next few steps. The second step doesn't look terrifying when you see it from below. In good weather, with full lungs, it's just a name on a map. But at roughly 8,600 meters, it isn't a step at all. It's a wall with a personality. When we came close, the silence thickened like frozen oil. The wind vanished, and I began to hear the smallest things. Fabric brushing my cheek, a grain of ice falling on steel, the heartbeat trying not to lose its rhythm. Mallory studied the face, straight up, then left, then right. "It'll go here," he said calmly, "if the hands don't betray us." "The hands won't," I replied, though I knew it isn't hands that fail. It's the air. I checked the knots, pulled the hose close to my body so it wouldn't snag, flexed my fingers while they still obeyed. He went first. It looked simple. Pick in a crack, right boot on a tiny ledge, a transfer of weight, left higher, pull, rise. But at this altitude, simplicity is complexity. Every move hides an abyss. I kept the rope taut, never dragging. Mallory moved neatly, without panic, shoulders trembling just enough to show the cost of effort, not fear. My turn. The rock was cold as a stranger's thought. I placed a crampon on a notch smaller than I'd judged from below, felt the steel searching for grip. The pick found a shallow pocket. I pushed upward, and the mask sealed hard against my face. One breath too short, the edges of my vision dimmed. I stopped just long enough to turn the valve a quarter higher, and the world returned, careful and bright. "There," I murmured, and moved again. Halfway up, a memory surfaced, a small detail. Back in base camp, one of my regulator caps used to squeak when tightened. Thinking of that sound somehow steadied me. Maybe that's how the mind clings to the ordinary while the body hangs over nothing. Mallory was already above the lip, bracing himself, searching for footholds for me. "Half a step left," he called, his voice a rope of its own. I did exactly that, and suddenly felt heavier than myself but moving correctly. We pulled over the top and sat, just long enough to align breath and numbers. Mallory closed his eyes, not from fatigue, but from thought. "Will it get easier from here?" I asked without hope. "It gets better while there's time," he said. And that was true. After the second step, the mountain often grows honest for a while. If you're here, it allows your existence, briefly. Around midday, the cloud did its favorite trick, wrapped us, vanished, teased us with clarity, then wrapped again. Through one clear gap, I glanced left and thought I saw movement far below. A tiny dark flicker in the white. Perhaps Odell, I thought. A warm thought, absurdly gentle in such a frozen place. We moved again, short, even sections. The summit pyramid was no longer a distant trident. It was geometry, close and undeniable. Everything now hinged on hours. Flow, rhythm, weather. I checked the gauge. The needle still held its dignity. "Sandy?" Mallory said without turning. "I'm here," I answered, and in that small exchange lived everything we needed to know about each other. The second step stayed behind, but its shadow followed. It's a threshold. Once crossed, you aren't the same. We were no longer climbers with machines. We were two men speaking in the mountain's own language. And sometimes, I swear, it answered. Not in words, but in weather, in silence, in that narrow slit of sky that opens just wide enough to let you take one more step. We were moving beyond logic now. Time had broken apart into fragments between breath and breath. Every motion was a question without the need for an answer. After the second step, we entered a place that numbers couldn't describe. Altitude here wasn't measured in meters, only in the distance between inhalations. It erased everything but will. The air had turned liquid. Each breath passed through me like water through a sieve. Mallory walked ahead in small, careful steps, as though treading thin ice over emptiness. The rope between us tightened and slackened like a thread of memory. I could hear only one sound, the calm hiss of the oxygen set. Inside that sound lived everything: life, peace, and the abyss itself. Around 9 o'clock, the cloud broke again, and the summit appeared. So close it seemed to belong to the sky, a brighter piece of it. I stopped to look and realized I wasn't afraid. There was only this one line drawn straight upward, gathering the whole world into a single direction. "Just a little more, Sandy," Mallory said softly. His voice wasn't a command or a plea. It was rhythm, music that kept me moving. We reached the narrow ridge. The wind died, as if holding its breath before saying something sacred. Silence up here isn't the absence of sound. It's the presence of something greater. You can feel the mountain listening. That truth doesn't make it easier. It makes it honest. Mallory paused sometimes, staring down the slope. His movements were deliberate, peaceful. A man who had finally arrived where proof was no longer needed. Near 11, we stopped by a small outcrop. "We'll rest a minute," he said. I nodded, checked the gauge, the needle at the edge. Perfect, just as planned. Mallory sat apart, looking at the summit. It no longer seemed like a goal, but an answer we had both known all along and couldn't speak aloud. "If the weather closes in," he said quietly, "don't rush. It's not a race. I know. If we vanish, someone will find us. Someday they'll understand why." "They'll find us," I said, though I wasn't sure. Maybe they'd only find the camera. Maybe that would be enough. When we started again, the world became simple. 3 colors: white, black, and blue. 3 sounds: hissing, breathing, footsteps. Nothing else was needed. We moved slowly, like 2 shadows trying to catch their own light. Each meter wasn't a victory. It was a compromise with ourselves. Above 8,700 meters, the air turned to powder. It burned the lungs from within, like breathing sparks. I saw Mallory sway, then steady himself, finding rhythm again. I drew closer. For the first time, I saw peace in his eyes, not exhaustion. "You all right?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "Just quiet inside." And indeed, it was quiet inside. Even fear had left. Only the strange calm remained. The feeling that we had finally reached where we were always meant to be. I didn't know how many meters or breaths were left, but it no longer mattered. We climbed, and that was enough. Mallory saw the ledge first. It angled upward, narrow, uncertain, a line that could be either a path or a trap. We approached carefully. Each step felt like a word spoken for the first time. I freed one hand and reached inside my jacket. The camera was there, small, black, heavier than it should be in this thin air. It was cold, but somehow alive. I raised it to my eyes. The lens fogged with my breath. I wiped it with the edge of my glove. Through the viewfinder, Mallory stood against the sky, a dark figure carved into blue, half man, half stone. I thought, maybe this is how we'll be seen one day. 2 silhouettes at the edge of air. "What are you doing?" he asked. I want something to remain. What if it falls? Then someone will find it. He smiled faintly. Good. Let it be found by someone who understands. I pressed the shutter. The sound was small, fragile, a heartbeat caught between beats. Maybe it was my last photograph. I didn't care if it came out. I only wanted someone, someday, to see that piece of sky and know we had been here. Mallory moved on, and I tucked the camera back inside my jacket, close to the warmth of my body. The film had to survive. We climbed, almost crawling now, as if the air itself was pressing us down. The world lost its shape. Only light remained. It didn't warm, but it led. Around 1 in the afternoon, we reached the narrowing ridge, the summit pyramid ahead. Mallory turned. His eyes glinted behind the goggles. "Just a little more," he said. And those words were no longer an instruction. They were farewell. I nodded. We moved again. Step, exhale. Half a step, again. The world collapsed into a single thin line where sky ended and something else began. Perhaps silence itself. I heard my oxygen hissing unevenly. The valve was freezing. I tapped the casing. A dull sound, like a heart under ice. The flow steadied, but I could feel the end of the supply approaching. Mallory looked back. We watched each other for several seconds, not as leader and climber, but as two people who already understood everything. "If anything happens," he said, "leave the camera." "I will," I answered. He climbed higher. I saw only his back, a dark shape in a white world. He took another step, and another. Then the wind rose, and everything disappeared. I don't remember how long I stood there, only that I was still breathing, and the hiss was growing quieter, as if someone was slowly dimming the light. I placed the camera carefully on a flat stone beside me. Straight, neat. Let it stay. Maybe someday someone will find it and understand that we truly reached where we meant to go. The world around me was only white, and in that white there was nothing frightening, only peace. I no longer felt the cold, only peace. The air had grown thick as glass, and my thoughts were quiet, slow, almost still. The summit stood just ahead, 1 step away, but I didn't take it. I sat and watched the clouds drift below my boots, and for the first time in all these weeks, there was no struggle, only silence. The mask lay beside me, the camera near my knee, a small black shape holding the last thing I saw. The sky, the ridge, Mallory's shadow. Maybe someday someone will find it, and when they do, even if we're long gone, the mountain will speak for us. They were here. The world grew brighter, everything fading, sound, form, even myself. And when all turned white, I understood. Silence doesn't take, it accepts. Epilogue, Official Report, 1999. On May 4th, 1999, at approximately 8,200 meters on the north face of Mount Everest, members of an expedition discovered the preserved body of a man, buried in snow and time. The clothing and equipment were consistent with the 1924 British expedition. A damaged oxygen cylinder was still fastened to his harness. In his pocket, they found a folding knife and an old camera, empty, without film. Identification confirmed the body was that of Andrew Irvine. Nearby, on a rocky ledge below, searchers found a length of weathered rope. The location matched the area known as the Second Step. George Mallory's remains were not found during that season. They would be discovered 2 years later several hundred meters further down the slope. None of the surviving negatives showed the summit, only several partial images taken at lower altitude. Yet, among the search team, one phrase lingered quietly. When we looked up at the sky, it felt like they were still there,